is, we're on location with Mr. Betcher and myself, and as you'll hear, we have a friend of the podcast, Mr. Phil Beyer, back with us to talk about some essentials in establishing an information security program, which is, you always got to start at the basics, start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start, as I've always believed, and he's going to be here to talk to us a little bit about different focus areas in establishing a proper information security program. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be back.
Yeah, we're always happy to have you. So maybe you could get us started on what you think would be the first step if a company doesn't have a proper information security program. Maybe you could talk about one of the first steps they should do to establish that.
Yeah, let's do that. So maybe we can begin with the fact that the kind of the need or the understanding of the requirement, what's the problem, and then we can describe maybe a solution. So
okay.
The problem, I believe, and some colleagues of mine have been working on this to describe better is we have in security and in many other professions, I suppose, as well, we have a lot of competing frameworks. There are, the NIST framework, the ISO frameworks, the Information Security Forum in the European theater has some of their frameworks, as well as COBIT, etc. So there are a lot of frameworks. You guys have even talked about them. You've reviewed many of them that establish a series of controls for a security program. Fantastic, wonderful, good stuff. All of them have their strengths and weaknesses. They don't describe, however, a comprehensive approach, fundamental approach to building a security program. They describe building security controls. Now, some of them refer to pieces of it, and so experts in those frameworks might call me out on that kind of a statement. What I wanted to talk about with you guys and have a conversation is the concept, though, about the core competencies that any security program must pursue, must work on, must develop to then grow and become a mature program. So where do you have to start, right?
Sure.
So you asked, where do you start? Well, I think maybe most clearly you can begin at how you govern and organize security, how you govern and organize your whole program. And there have been debates since the beginning of the security profession where people report and how people are structured, et cetera. And that's kind of the general gist of what we should talk about. Not necessarily solving that problem, but that governance and organization represents that fundamental aspect of how you build a security program. And there's many different ways to slice it, but you have to decide. You have to make a decision. What do you guys think? I mean, is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I think so. I guess everything should start at the top from the executive level, right? Decisions have to be made, core decisions. Mm-hmm. What kinds of decisions do you need to make? Like, for example, one might be, what are we trying to secure here? What data do we have that we need to keep safe? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Things like that. You want to speak to?
Absolutely. So part of what you're describing is, what are the requirements for our program, mm-hmm. right? Why do we even want one? Why do we even need one? Is it because everybody had one and I read about it in the Sky Mall catalog, or is it because on the plane, or is it because I have a legitimate list of requirements or needs to build a program? So I think that's a great place to start, and clearly there's no simple answer to that. That's organization specific. Other kinds of things that you might kind of fundamentally create in or build as a foundation for your program is how you would structure the team. Who reports to who, who's in charge of what, how big the team might eventually be, how big the team needs to be to start to be minimally functional, and then how that team reports and works with the rest of the organization. Maybe in particular some sort of executive sponsorship. Who is really in charge? Not necessarily reporting structure, though that comes into play, but who really is behind this as a program and really wants to see it through.
Right.
Yeah, management would probably have some kind of mission statement, I would imagine, as well, as we want to make sure that the idea of management is it's got to be broad, where they're worried about the overarching security of the entire company more than a specific division or group, because they're responsible for the IS for the entire organization. So theirs would be broad. It wouldn't necessarily even be policies and stuff. It'd be like, okay, we want to make sure that we don't have a target level event. How do we do that? And theirs is all about, delegating the authority to do those kinds of missions. It'd be like missions or a mission statement. So, okay, mostly would be delegated to IT or IS, and then they would answer to either the CTO or, God forbid, the CFO. I would imagine it would be something similar to that, where it would be very broad instead of, what data are we wanting to protect, or, what do we think is important? Because not necessarily one piece is important. It's what is important is IS of the whole organization.
Yeah, and so it's kind of including in that, you then want to also describe or include or build a framework for how you deal with risk once it's identified by your program, right? So this is like the governance aspect of it.
Yeah.
How do you make risk decisions? Who's involved at certain levels, right? You might have, for lack of a better word, straightforward or well understood risk decisions that involve core members of your team and in the security program, and then bubble that kind of information up for simple review, but for straightforward review by other executives. You might have, you might describe here and kind of in this area or core competency of your program, an enterprise risk committee. It begins to be legitimate in certain size organizations to have a risk committee that reviews enterprise risk, not just information risk, but all sorts of risk throughout the organization. And so you want to then include and describe how your security program fits into the overall enterprise risk structure. So that's kind of where a program might begin. You go from there, from again, a kind of high-level requirements description of why your security program even exists and what it's for and what it's going to do, how it's organized, into a strategy, right? So you move from there to building the second core competency, which is the strategy of your program. How does our security program meet the requirements that the organization has defined? What is our approach to adhering to these requirements? What is our approach to clarifying these requirements and getting to a deeper understanding of what that means for our team on a daily basis, for our team on a monthly and quarterly basis, and for our team on an annual and ongoing basis?
So how that meets, is that KPI?
So that would feed into an additional core competency. We'll absolutely talk about measurement and metrics, but absolutely, Brian, the strategic component should be well aligned with how you then report, right? How you then communicate, how you then share what is our performance along the strategic direction or roadmap, right? But I would maybe pull back to say that a strategic vision is just that. It's a vision. It is, we've laid out a direction. We've tried to clearly communicate it so that anybody on the team understands what's important to us and what is essential and most important to us and what is less important to us, so that we all move in the same direction. And that's a core piece of vision casting. So,
okay.
But yeah, that roadmap is the piece here, strategic piece that this core competency represents. That's where the rubber meets the road here in this piece of your program.
Well, that would also be along the lines of where you'd be planning. Like, we want to be at such a level 4 to 6 months down the road. This would be like a long-term goal. This would where you do the long-term planning for how you want to be, right, in the future.
Absolutely. So the strategic view is both, has a moderately near-term component. It could be 6 months ahead of time, but it absolutely needs to include midterm and long-term type views. You really need to look in the far term for where we want to be, how we want to move towards it, because that then defines what, again, that strategic direction of your program.
Mm-hmm.
See, this confuses me a little bit. I'm thinking, where do we need to be? Well, the easy answer is, well, let's not get hacked ever.
Right. Right. No. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I guess it's oversimplified, right? I'm just having a hard time understanding what other questions you have to answer other than that one. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So if the kind of, for lack of a better word, team mission is to protect customer data, or something like that, right? Something very straightforward. There is a means by which we do it. So we have incident response team deployed in this such a way, because it's not, there's no universal way to design a security team. So here's an example. Where are we strategically going to spend money? Does that mean we're going to spend money on endpoint protection? Does that mean we're going to spend money on perimeter security? Does that mean we're going to spend money on database access and control? Maybe it means we're not spending security money at all. Maybe it means we're augmenting IT teams exclusively, and we're doing IT security solely. Maybe our practice or organization has very little IT investment. We have email and document repositories, but maybe our folks are largely consultative in nature, and they're always going out to customer locations. I think, again, it highly depends on the design of the organization, but maybe a different way to state what a strategy could look like is, where are we going to spend money and when are we going to spend it?
Okay.
Because because that's really what it boils down to, right? I mean, because if you don't have any money, then you don't have a security program. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah.
You have to have something. So if you have some money and you have to decide where to spend it strategically, am I going to spend it in incident response first? Am I going to spend it in preventative controls? Am I going to spend it in analysis and detection tools? Am I going to spend it on a tool at all? Maybe I'm going to spend it on a person, which may be a significantly better way to go. So I think that strategically, that's the biggest decision that any security program leader or security program owner must make. Where am I going to spend the money? And describing that to an audience like your CIO or other executive management, even your direct supervisor, your strategic approach is how you would describe maybe everything, but literally, I want to spend $1 here and $5 there and $10 there, right? Okay. Your strategy should basically lay out how you're going to spend your money and how you're going to move forward, and then the budget follows it, right? The next day or the next hour.
It's also taking stock of what you have currently. If you already have, a log server, or you already have IDS, but you don't have a fully fleshed out IS plan, I think it's akin to like being stuck in the forest like Survivor Man on Discovery Channel. He always has to take stock of what he has and then where he wants to be with what he has. So, if he's trying to make a shelter, he needs to know that he has a tarp, or he has, a jacket that he can, lay over a branch or something like that. It's kind of the same thing. You got to know what tools you already have available so that you know how to spend smartly later on, or maybe you don't even have to spend some. Maybe you've got a bunch of disparate systems that you have to take and put under one envelope and say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we're going to work with. Okay, yeah, maybe we need a couple of things down the line that's going to work, but for the meantime, to get a base IS program started, we have X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be good enough for now.
Absolutely. So there's a kind of final component in the strategic area that you really need to include, alignment, right? So strategically, a security program must be aligned with the business to be ultimately successful. It's not difficult to be successful immediately without that alignment, but in the long term, there's no way that you're going to be successful without clear alignment with the business. And so here's some examples of what that might look like. If the organization's priority is serving customers, then security programs' priority must be serving customers, and you have to break it. You have to pull it back to that constantly. We want to spend, or we want to make a business case for this tool or this feature of our security program for the next annual budget cycle. Here you go, boss. No. Here you go, boss, and here's why it directly affects our customers, the safety and security of our customers' data. Here's why, and maybe that's not your goal. Maybe your goal is, I can't really think of a good goal here. Maybe
Uptime or something.
Yeah, there you go, good. Maybe your organization is, for security, purely cares most about availability. Yeah. And so here's how this security feature or function will impact, as to the very least, uptime. Right? Here's what's going on, because security always affects uptime.
Or help to increase.
Exactly, or help to increase. Period. In the long term. So I think that's that alignment with business goals and objectives is a core piece of the strategic message.
You have to point in the same direction, otherwise
Absolutely.
pull each other apart.
Absolutely. Okay, now everybody's favorite security program discussion always comes back to frameworks. Somebody always has to bring up NIST 853 or ISO 27002 or any of our other favorite numbers, COVID 5, whatever. Insert your favorite one here. And yes, every security program must, in some way, shape, or form, recognize the existence of said framework or frameworks and identify how, from a regulatory standpoint, the program is currently seeking to adhere, completely does adhere, or doesn't need to adhere, right? So there are plenty of frameworks that are out there that don't apply to organizations for various reasons. The auditor might ask, a customer, a potential customer might ask. It's always good to have a reason prepared for why a particular framework doesn't apply to your organization. Yeah. But more likely, you have to describe which ones you adhere to and why. So the third major component of any security program must deal with or treat security frameworks. And we don't need to get into the specifics. Again, you guys have covered frameworks at a high level already in a previous episode. But the program itself and the leader of the program must clearly lay out the frameworks that apply from a regulatory standpoint, or the frameworks that you selected, whether or not they have anything to do with a regulation, and why you're using them, how closely you adhere, because you don't, especially with if you don't have regulatory oversight, you may not have to adhere. So why you adhere, how closely you do adhere, and then the relationship to that strategy the strategic components we just described, right? So strategically, we need to be protecting our customers' data. We're doing it by spending money over here, and then kind of from a framework standpoint, that moves us from 25% coverage to 55% coverage over the next 2 years or something like that, right? We're now with three core competencies that we've described. We're now starting to tell a very clear story about our security program. We've got how it's organized and built, why it was even conceived of. We've got strategically where it's headed, a clear direction and movement, hopefully momentum behind it, and then a skeletal framework by which we can describe how we are actually working to largely prevent bad stuff from happening.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if you don't want to choose a framework? I mean, what are some disadvantages to that?
Okay, so not having anything at all. I think the primary disadvantage is the fight with the auditors, right? So whether you have auditors in place, maybe you're a small organization. Auditor is that general term for somebody who's going to come in and look, right? You may not have auditors, but you have customers. I mean, any business has to have customers, right? I think that's a fair assumption. On some level, customers care. Small organizations, they probably don't need something, but the faster organizations grow, the faster things get out of hand. I think the benefit of a framework, largely, in the security space, is a clear map of where we're covered and where we're not, right? What do we include and what are we thinking about and what do we care about and what do we either not care about or we haven't included yet because we know that we need to. But it's a way to say, here's what we're missing. Most clearly, right? It's a very well-defined, and the other kind of piece to that is it makes for good apples-to-apples comparisons between other organizations. If you do, and I hope that any security program leader does, get to conferences and other interactions with other security professionals outside of his or her organization, it's a way to have a very straightforward communication about the status of one's own program and whether other people or other groups have found success with certain kinds of controls in their organizations. It's a starting point. But yeah, listen, there are a few kinds of organizations that don't have to adhere to anything in particular, and that's great. That's fantastic. I think that to be successful, though, it works best to just pick one then. Pick your favorite or roll the dice and make a choice and describe how your program, because largely your program does adhere. your security controls do adhere to some sort of framework, just maybe not, strictly. Okay.
Yeah, they could be.
That's the whole point. The framework is a relatively complete description of security controls that you could put in your environment. So on some level, if you have any security controls at all, you adhere to a framework. You just may not adhere to it strictly.
Sure. The ISO standard you mentioned, NIST, there's a bunch of other ones. Those are just best practices, which they're not required to follow, so you can follow any or all of them. They often are quite daunting to put in, especially the ISO standard, because if you go from 0 to, ISO standard, you're going to be spending quite a bit of money or time and effort which is the same thing in the long run. It all comes down to money to implement, and it may be overkill for, like you said, what you're using. Do you have a go-to that you follow? I was following the ISO guidelines for a long time until I realized that nobody should really have to pay to get a best practice or to understand, because there's a lot of other options out there for best
enough,
practice.
But organizations do have maintenance costs there, Brian. Somebody has to pay the electric bill. So for the servers that host the files or something. So sure. I don't know. I never found that the ISO standards cost that much. They're a couple $100 or something, right? But fair. Okay, in concept maybe it shouldn't cost money. So listen, I've worked. So in my consulting days, I went to 27002. That was my go-to because it was just straightforward. I enjoyed how it was laid out, and so it was kind of the first one I looked to for guidance. In my state government days, I paid attention to NIST 853 and the rest of the NIST special publications to adhere more closely to things like our federal government buddies must adhere to with FISMA and those kinds of approaches and controls. These days, I play in the HIPAA world, so I pay a lot of attention to HIPAA, it's not nearly as comforting as some of the other frameworks because I wouldn't necessarily classify HIPAA as a framework. It's not a comprehensive treatment of security controls, but it's a regulatory framework for sure. So I have to pay attention to that. I don't know. I had meant to spend more time learning COBIT and never really have. So if I had my druthers, I might do that just for kicks. But these days I don't find that I have any of that extra time that some people talk about. So do you guys have any favorites or any other kinds of things in your review of frameworks that anything that pokes out or jump at you?
Well, I've had to deal with HIPAA as a consultant, and I did find it lacking as well. Where, that one almost gets you to a baseline, much like PCI does, and then I find that you can go much farther and much more secure with both HIPAA and PCI. A lot of hospitals could probably do well with just not breathing a sigh of relief at HIPAA because I don't think it makes them any more secure than. I think they could definitely go farther with those. I haven't had a lot of experience with like SSAE or anything like that, but a lot of them map to ISO standards, which is why ISO is the standard. And if you were to follow that, then if you follow multiple regulatory guidelines like SOX or FISMA and FedRAMP and those, you'll find that they all kind of align themselves to the ISO standards on purpose.
Yeah, or in the federal space, the NIST standards tend to be the reference frame. The other kind of set of recommended practices I've been meaning to dig deeper into is the Information Security Forum, the ISF's. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in multiple revisions now, revision 3, 4, 5, something like that, of kind of recommended practices and security controls. It's a very similar kind of framework. But slightly different approach and slightly different take on it. So again, that might be something to investigate depending. But all that to say that frameworks tend to be a good, easy way to build your security control structure around and understand how that works in your environment. So kind of the elephant in the room we haven't yet discussed, and I would say absolutely potentially the biggest core competency from our, even bigger than frameworks, from the perspective of a true information security risk professional is risk management. So let's talk a little bit about risk management and how that fits into the core competency of a security program. Ultimately, and I really find this to be excruciatingly difficult to do, but ultimately, we all need to figure out what the risk tolerance of our organization really is. Because that is the first piece to understand how we're going to manage risk in our environment, right? So we need to know, what can our org really tolerate? What can we really do? And whether you describe that in terms of, I've heard different folks suggest that's best described in terms of dollars, right? How big of an event would really be that big of a deal for your organization? Is it a $100,000 event? Is it $1 million event? Is it a $10 million event? Another way to describe it, though a bit morbid, is what kind of event would it take for you to get fired as a security program leader? It's a little bit harder to describe in terms of risk tolerance, but I still have not heard, and if there's anybody out there listening, I would love a great answer to this. How do you describe risk tolerance? What is a great, relatively objective way to describe the risk tolerance of your organization, other than it's purple, right? Or 3 or 6.7, right?
Yeah, what's your pain threshold,
Exactly. So I'm reminded of the when I walk into the hospital, or more likely take my children into the hospital, we've got the pain tolerance graphic, right? It's always on the wall of every single room in the hospital. Are you this or are you this, right? Are you 1 or are you 10 on your pain scale with the pretty little pictures of faces? So anyway, picking the tolerance or the risk tolerance for your organization, agreeing on that, coming up with that's the first piece of any risk management program. I think that furthermore, the rest kind of starts to fall into place for a security professional. I mean, we all take classes on this. We all learn about this all the time, that we need to do assessments. We need to bring that back to what are the real risks that are identified. And I'm not talking about vulnerability scans. I mean, maybe that's included in your risk assessment, but ultimately, periodic risk assessments of our whole organization or pieces of our organization is what falls into here. The one thing that I would say here that's not necessarily obvious to the budding security professional or the newly minted security program leader is the concept of a risk register.